In the autumn of 1980, a footman working the state rooms at Balmoral stood close enough to hear Prince Philip lean toward the guest beside him, watch 19-year-old Diana Spencer cross the carpet, and let 5 quiet words fall, "She was never really ours," and then said nothing about it for years. If this account has been useful, subscribing costs nothing, and more stories like this one are queued. The bell notification means you will see them. This was Balmoral, the family's own castle in the Scottish Highlands, where the Windsors went every autumn to shoot on the hills and be, for a few weeks, a little more themselves. Tartan on the walls, stags' heads above the doors. The fires kept burning against the cold coming down off the moor. The light was already going by 4 in the afternoon, and the footman could tell you the exact spot on the carpet where he was standing when it happened. Diana Spencer was 19. Someone had guided her in among the Windsors for one of the first times, and she was smiling, careful, holding a champagne glass she never once drank from. The footman remembered the glass most of all. Full when she came in, still full when she left. Champagne going warm and flat in a hand that never lifted it, while she gave the room a smile it had not earned yet. Prince Philip watched her cross the room. He did not smile. He put his mouth close to the shoulder beside him, the way a man does when he means for only one person to hear. And he said it. She was never really ours. Hold on to those 5 words. By the end, you will have to decide what they meant, and you will not be sure. The footman carried his tray on. He did not stop. He did not look up. He did not repeat what he had heard to a single soul. For years he said nothing at all. To understand the sentence, you have to understand the man who spoke it. Philip grew up stateless, shuttled between exiled relatives across Europe, a boy with a royal name and no country to put it in. He was born on the island of Corfu and carried out of Greece as a baby in a cot made from an old orange crate when his family fled into exile. He had no house that was his, no country that kept him. He was sent to school in Scotland, hardened there, then went into the Royal Navy and made himself into an officer. When he married Elizabeth in 1947, he gave up his foreign titles to do it. He was not born into the House of Windsor. He earned his way in, by discipline, by usefulness, by making himself the kind of man the institution could not manage without. And that is the thing to hold. To Philip, the family was not a bloodline you were simply born clever enough to join. It was an institution. You served it. You proved yourself to it. You did not arrive already belonging. Diana arrived already belonging. She was an earl's daughter, raised half a mile from Sandringham, from a family older on English soil than the Windsors themselves. She had grown up at Park House, on the edge of the Sandringham estate, close enough that as a child she had played on the same grounds where the royal family spent their Christmases. The Spencers had served kings and queens for centuries. Their name was older than the German line that had only become Windsor in 1917. She did not have to earn a pedigree. In the sheer age of her name, she outranked half the people in that room, and every one of them knew it. A former lady-in-waiting remembered how hard the girl worked at the smaller things. Diana practicing which door to enter. Diana holding a curtsy, testing the depth of it, learning the choreography of a family that was already, quietly, reading her. Picture her at that door, rehearsing a curtsy for a family that had already made up its mind about her, and the 2 halves of the house read her in 2 different ways. The staff noticed one thing above all. She asked their names, the footmen, the maids, the men carrying the trays. She wanted to know who they were, and not one of them ever forgot it. The family noticed something else, something no rehearsed curtsy could ever fix. The public already loved her, more than it had ever loved a single Windsor in that room. And to Philip, who had spent his whole life proving he belonged to this family. That adoration was not a gift. It was the proof of the very thing he had just whispered, and the world would not stop feeding that proof. On a July morning in 1981, Diana rode to St Paul's Cathedral in a glass coach. A girl of 20, in a dress with a train so long it spilled out of the carriage behind her. Something close to 750 million people watched her do it. Streets packed for miles. Strangers weeping on the pavement for a woman most of them would never meet. When she stepped onto that balcony and the crowd roared, it looked like a coronation. In a way it was. A global coronation of affection. For a bride, the corridors of her new home were already handling rather than welcoming. That was the split the staff saw from up close, and it never healed. Outside the walls, she was the most adored woman alive. Inside them, according to servants who worked those rooms, she was being managed, watched, corrected, moved from one engagement to the next, like something valuable and fragile, on loan rather than owned. The public got the shy smile and the lowered eyes. The household got a problem it did not know how to hold. And every week the world loved her more. The distance between those two Dianas grew wider. Into that distance came the letters. Philip wrote to her more than once, over years, and the butler later confirmed the letters existed. Some of them were blunt, the kind of plain instruction a soldier gives. A few were unexpectedly gentle, almost tender, and he signed every one of them the same way, with a single, small word at the bottom of the page. Pa, read that signature again. A stepfather's word, warm and domestic, coming from the coldest man in the family. Kindness, or a leash, you decide, because the people closest to them never could. The people who loved Diana and the people who loved Philip read those identical pages in opposite directions. Friends of Diana say the letters cut her open, that under the soft, fatherly word sat a man spelling out, line by line, exactly how she was failing them. Friends of Philip say the reverse. They say he was reaching for her in the only language he had ever been given, trying to haul her inside the walls before the walls sealed her out for good. Both of those can be true at once. That is the uneasy centre of the whole thing, and it does not resolve. And this is what makes the Duke so hard to judge. Philip spent his entire life proving he was one of them. A stateless boy, shunted between exiled relatives, handed no birthright and no country. He earned his place at that table by discipline and by usefulness, paying for it in full, one instalment at a time. He knew precisely what belonging cost, because he had counted every coin. Then he stood in a warm room and watched a girl the whole world had already claimed as its own, and he suspected she never truly could belong. And maybe, somewhere under the suspicion, he envied her. She never had to try. The crowd handed her its love for nothing, the one thing he had never been given. For a while, the whisper stayed a whisper, folded away in a corridor at Balmoral. Then it turned into a roar. By 1992, the marriage was public wreckage. Front pages in a dozen languages, secret tapes played back to millions. Two people who could no longer be arranged into the same photograph, without the whole country reading the space between them. The gap Philip had named in 5 quiet words, over a carpet, watching a 19-year-old cross it, was now the most famous marriage collapse on the planet. By 1996, it was over on paper. A divorce. Diana formally outside the family she had walked into as a bride. The styling that bound her to them quietly removed. The outsider verdict, muttered once in a private room and heard by one man carrying a tray, was now stamped, signed, and legal. She was, officially, no longer theirs. If you have already decided what Philip meant by those 5 words, hold that thought. What comes next will make you doubt it. Because in the summer of 1997, the most famous woman in the family was dead in a Paris tunnel, gone in a few seconds under the Pont de l'Alma, at 36 years old. And the crowds that flooded the streets with flowers did not blame the car, or the road, or bad luck. They blamed the institution, the firm, the very family Philip had spent his life serving, the walls he had fought so hard to stand inside. So the 5 words spoken over her, 17 years before, still carried no tone. She was never really ours. Had he meant she was too good for them, or never good enough? A verdict, or a grief? No one alive could say. The family that had let those words fall in a private room ended up handing her body back to the public that had always felt she belonged to them, and not one person who had heard the sentence would ever explain it. No one, except the single man who had been standing close enough to catch it, still holding the tray. He is an old man now, the weight of that tray long gone from his hands, and he chooses his words the way he once chose which glass to lift first. Careful, almost apologetic. He can give you the sentence exactly, he says, because he felt it land. What he cannot give you is the one thing everyone wants from him. He cannot prove tone. He never knew whether Philip meant she was too good for them or never good enough. That is the wall he keeps walking back into. He was close enough to catch 5 words and never close enough to catch the man behind them. A footman learns to read a room, not a heart, and the Duke of Edinburgh had spent a whole lifetime making his heart the hardest thing in any room to read. So he lays out the 2 readings, and he refuses to choose. One version is almost tender. Philip watched a girl of 19 cross the carpet and understood, before anyone else in that house, that she shone in a way the family never could, and the words slipped out as a kind of surrender. Too good for them. The other reading is colder, that the Duke had already weighed her and found her wrong for the walls. Too soft, too easily loved by strangers. A verdict passed quietly over a glass she was still holding. So which was it? Too good for them, or never good enough? Sit with it, because the footman never decided either. He has carried both readings for 40 years and set neither of them down. There is only one detail he's sure of, and it is the one that haunts him. A moment after the whisper, Diana turned and smiled at the Duke, having heard nothing. She had no idea. The most private judgment of her life had just been spoken 3 feet from her ear, and she gave the man who spoke it the warm, open smile the whole world would soon know by heart. He watched her do it. He has watched her do it in his memory every year since. Think about that for a moment. She trusted the room. She had spent the week rehearsing which door to enter and which curtsy to hold, learning the names of the staff, doing everything right, and the sharpest reading of who she was had already been filed away in 5 words, by the one man whose verdict the whole family measured itself against. For years he said nothing, and he wants you to understand that it was not cowardice, or not only that. Staff who work those rooms are held by something the family never has to explain out loud. You see everything, and you carry none of it back out through the door. To repeat what you overheard was not gossip. It was betrayal, and the man who betrayed it would never work in a great house again. So he folded the sentence away and got on with his life. It took the marriage falling apart, then the divorce, then the funeral, and then the long quiet of old age, before saying it out loud felt less like breaking faith and more like finally telling the truth. Because look at what became of those 5 words. Philip let them fall in a private room, into one shoulder, in a house, sealed off from the public. And by September of 1997, the same family that had spoken them stood behind a sea of flowers it had no idea how to answer, and carried Diana's coffin out through the palace gates to crowds that lined the streets for miles. The family handed her body back to the public that always felt she was theirs. Whatever the Duke had meant that night, the ending agreed with him. She was never really theirs. Look at where she ended up, and ask yourself whether Philip was cruel that night, or simply right, and the letters read differently now too. Those blunt, awkward pages he signed Pa, the ones friends of Diana swear, cut her to the bone. If some private corner of the Duke had already decided she belonged somewhere he could never follow, then the letters were not an attack at all. They were a man reaching, in the only language he had ever been given, for someone he had quietly judged unreachable, pulling at a door he already suspected was open to the other side, which is what makes those 5 words so hard to file away as simple cruelty. Take the malice out of them and something heavier is left behind. They may be the most accurate thing anyone in that family ever said about Diana, and the saddest. A stateless boy who had spent his whole life earning his place among the Windsors, watching a woman walk in from a name older than theirs, a woman who would never have to earn a thing, and naming the loss out loud before it had even arrived. Not jealousy exactly, something closer to recognition. He was right about the glass too. She held it all evening and never once drank from it, the same way she held the whole family close and never quite swallowed it. And the 5 words, she was never really ours, hung over everything that came after like a sentence already passed. She turned and smiled at the Duke a moment later, having heard nothing at all. That is the picture the old footman leaves you with. A young woman gliding across a carpet at Balmoral in the autumn of 1980, careful, radiant, and already half gone. A whisper that outlived the marriage, outlived the divorce, and outlived the woman herself. Perhaps Philip had simply seen, before anyone else, where she belonged.